This happened many Christmases ago, but even now, whenever December rolls around, the memory comes back as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, not because it was dramatic or explosive, but because it was quietly perfect. The kind of memory that still makes you smile no matter how old you get. This isn't technically my story, it's my dad's. More specifically, it's my dad's revenge. He doesn't know what Reddit is. He barely knows how to use a smartphone. So I'm telling it for him, because if anyone deserves credit for a perfectly executed moment of petty justice, it's him. For context, we live in the UK. My dad and his older sister, my aunt, have always had a complicated relationship. On the surface, they're cordial, polite, family, but underneath that politeness is a lifetime of quiet tension that never fully disappears. They grew up in the same house with the same parents, but life split them into completely different worlds. My aunt married well, very well. She and my uncle are wealthy in the kind of way that doesn't need to be announced. It shows itself automatically. Their house is enormous, not just big, but unnecessarily large. 6 bathrooms, a heated swimming pool, long hallways that echo when you walk through them, rooms that feel more like hotel suites than living spaces. Money has never been a concern for them. It never enters the conversation unless it's being casually referenced. My dad's life went in the opposite direction. He worked hard his entire life, but luck never seemed to stick around long enough to help. Health problems crept in slowly, then all at once. A physical disability followed, limiting the kind of work he could do. Jobs became harder to find, harder to keep, and barely paid enough to survive. Even now, he struggles to make ends meet. But here's the thing about my dad. Despite all of it, he never became bitter. He's optimistic to a fault, the kind of man who laughs at his own bad luck and cracks jokes when things go wrong. He finds humor in small moments, in silly things, in anything that makes life feel lighter. My aunt, on the other hand, is serious, stern, practical to the point of coldness. Over the years, her wealth did something subtle but damaging to her personality. It made her distant, dismissive, unable or unwilling to relate to the hardships my dad faces. And nowhere was that difference more obvious than at Christmas. Every year, Christmas highlighted the gap between them, not just financially, but emotionally. My aunt loved giving gifts, but not in a warm, selfless way. Her gifts were extravagant, expensive, and impossible to ignore. Designer items, luxury brands, the kind of presents that made everyone stop and stare when they were unwrapped. My dad couldn't compete with that. Some years he could barely afford gifts at all, and when he did, they were modest, thoughtful, but simple. And my aunt made sure everyone noticed. It was never outright cruelty, never anything you could directly call her out on. It was the tone, the sighs, the tight smile that didn't quite hide her disappointment, the subtle comments that lingered in the air just long enough to sting. "Oh, that's nice," she'd say. Or, "You really didn't have to," in a way that made it sound like he shouldn't have bothered. You could feel it, the judgment, the comparison, the unspoken message that he wasn't doing enough. My dad noticed it every single time. But he never argued, never raised his voice, never confronted her. He'd just smile, make a joke, and move on as if none of it mattered. But even the most patient people feel things. One year, money was tighter than usual. My dad was stressed. Christmas was coming, and he wanted to bring something for my aunt and uncle, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely cared about giving gifts that made people happy. He didn't want to show up empty-handed, not again. A few weeks before Christmas, we were browsing through a charity shop when he spotted them. 2 animatronic dogs. They were old, clearly vintage, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in another decade. Their fur was slightly worn, their plastic eyes just a little too shiny. When you pressed the button, they sang and danced in perfect, ridiculous synchrony. They were silly, completely unapologetically silly. My dad turned them on right there in the shop. The dogs started singing, swaying side to side, mouths opening and closing in exaggerated motions. My sister and I immediately burst out laughing. So did he. It was the kind of laughter that comes naturally, without thinking, the kind that reminds you how good it feels to just enjoy something dumb and harmless. My dad looked at us, still smiling, and said, "Your uncle will absolutely love these." And he was right. He bought them on the spot. At home, he tested them again, laughing every time they started singing. For the first time in a while, he seemed genuinely excited about a gift. Christmas Day came, and we traveled down to my aunt's house early in the morning. The place was immaculate, decorated like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. Everything matched. Everything was perfect. When it was time to exchange gifts, my dad presented the dogs. The moment he pressed the button, the room changed. The dogs started singing. My uncle laughed so hard he actually cried. He bent over, wiping his eyes, barely able to breathe. Their cat lost its mind, hissing and swatting at the dogs as they danced, which somehow made everything even funnier. Everyone was laughing. Except my aunt. She smiled, but it was tight and forced. Her eyes flicked from the dogs to my dad and back again. I caught her muttering something under her breath. I don't even know where I'd put these. It was absurd. Her house was enormous. There was space everywhere. But it wasn't about space. She hated them. Not because they were loud, not because they were silly, but because they weren't expensive, because they didn't signal wealth or status, because they didn't fit her idea of what a proper gift should be. The rest of the day went on as usual. We ate, talked, laughed. On the surface, everything was fine. When it was time for us to leave, my dad's girlfriend started packing the car while we said our goodbyes. We hugged, exchanged pleasantries, and drove home. It wasn't until we got back that we realized something was wrong. The dogs were in our car. At some point, while no one was looking, my aunt had put them back. No note, no explanation, no apology, just rejection. It sucked the joy right out of the day. Everyone was annoyed, hurt, confused. Everyone except my dad. He just laughed, rolled his eyes like this was something he'd seen coming, like he was used to being dismissed. But when I looked at him closely, I saw something else behind that laugh. Not anger, something quieter. Something deliberate. That quiet look on my dad's face stayed with me for the rest of the evening. It wasn't anger, and it definitely wasn't sadness. It was the kind of look you see when someone accepts something they've dealt with their entire life, and then, quietly, decides they're done letting it slide. He didn't bring it up on the drive home. Not once. The dog sat in the back of the car, boxed up again, silent now. My sister was still annoyed. My dad's girlfriend kept shaking her head in disbelief, and I felt that uncomfortable mix of secondhand embarrassment and frustration that comes from watching someone you love get disrespected. My dad just hummed along to the radio. When we got home, we unloaded the car. The dogs were placed on the table, still wrapped. For a moment, no one said anything. Then my dad chuckled softly, the way he always does when something absurd happens. "Well," he said, "I suppose they didn't fancy them." That was it. No rant, no complaint, just that. But over the next few days, I noticed something different about him. He seemed lighter, amused, as if an idea had planted itself in his mind and was slowly growing roots. My dad has always been a jokester, not the loud, attention-seeking kind, but the subtle kind. The kind who enjoys small, clever moments more than grand gestures. If there was ever a way for him to respond to this situation, it was never going to be through confrontation. It was going to be through humor. A few days after Christmas, I walked into the living room to find him examining a box. Not just any box. It was one of those luxury boxes. Thick cardboard, glossy finish, elegant lettering, the kind of box that immediately signals expensive, even when it's empty. It had once held a set of high-end beauty products that his girlfriend had received as a gift from a friend. The box was pristine. He turned it over in his hands, thoughtful. Then he smiled. That was the moment I knew. He didn't say anything to us. He didn't announce a plan or explain what he was about to do. He just quietly got to work. He opened the box and carefully placed the dogs inside. He adjusted them so they fit perfectly, like they belonged there. Then he took out a pen and a piece of paper. My dad has never been a man of many words, but when he does write something down, it's always deliberate. He sat at the table for a long moment, thinking, tapping the pen lightly against the paper. Then he wrote the note. Short, sharp, perfect. A dog is for life, not just for Christmas. No explanation, no apology, no confrontation. Just the message. My dad never asked how she reacted. He never needed to. The satisfaction was in the act itself, not the response. From that day on, something shifted in the family dynamic. It was subtle, but it was there. My aunt never made another comment about my dad's gifts. She never sighed or muttered under her breath again, at least not where anyone could hear. And my dad? He went right on being himself, laughing, joking, finding joy in the small things. Every Christmas since, whenever someone brings up gifts or money or family tension, we all share a knowing look, and then we laugh. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it isn't cruel, it doesn't leave scars. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a luxury box. I remember sitting quietly in the back of the car that day, watching my dad's calm expression as we drove home. He hummed along to the radio like nothing had happened, like the chaos of our Christmas visit hadn't even touched him. The dogs sat there in their box, a quiet reminder of the absurdity we had just endured. My sister was still shaking her head, annoyed at the whole situation, and my dad's girlfriend looked equally bemused. But my dad, he seemed almost lighter, as if some invisible weight had lifted. I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe he was just used to her behavior, used to being dismissed, used to the subtle digs and the unspoken comparisons. But then I noticed the small spark in his eyes, the kind of spark that only appears when someone is quietly plotting, quietly enjoying the anticipation of poetic justice. A few days after Christmas, I walked into the living room to find him examining a box. Not just any box, it was one of those luxury boxes. Thick cardboard, glossy finish, elegant lettering. The kind of box that immediately signals expensive, even when it's empty. It had once held a set of high-end beauty products that his girlfriend had received as a gift from a friend. The box was pristine. He turned it over in his hands, thoughtful. Then he smiled. That was the moment I knew. He didn't say anything to us. He didn't announce a plan or explain what he was about to do. He just quietly got to work. He opened the box and carefully placed the dogs inside. He adjusted them so they fit perfectly, like they belonged there. Then he took out a pen and a piece of paper. My dad has never been a man of many words, but when he does write something down, it's always deliberate. He sat at the table for a long moment, thinking, tapping the pen lightly against the paper. Then he wrote the note. Short, sharp, perfect. A dog is for life, not just for Christmas. No explanation, no apology, no confrontation, just the message. My dad never asked how she reacted. He never needed to. The satisfaction was in the act itself, not the response. From that day on, something shifted in the family dynamic. It was subtle, but it was there. My aunt never made another comment about my dad's gifts. She never sighed or muttered under her breath again, at least not where anyone could hear. And my dad? He went right on being himself, laughing, joking, finding joy in the small things. Every Christmas since, whenever someone brings up gifts or money or family tension, we all share a knowing look, and then we laugh. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it isn't cruel, it doesn't leave scars. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a luxury box. We never heard a word from my aunt about it. No phone call, no message, nothing. The silence was part of the perfection. I imagine the moment she opened that package at home, I can picture her expecting some lavish gift, some proof that my dad had somehow managed to compete this year. her eyes lighting up with that faint spark of anticipation, because even she couldn't entirely ignore the idea that maybe, just maybe, he had put thought and effort into something this time. And then, the dogs. The same ridiculous, singing, dancing dogs she had so clearly despised. The ones that had made her mutter under her breath on Christmas Day. The ones she had tried to secretly put back in our car. And there, on top of them, the note. I like to think of her expression in that moment. Confusion followed by disbelief. A flicker of annoyance. And then the slow, creeping realization that my dad had not only delivered the dogs back to her, but had done so in a way that mocked the entire hierarchy she'd tried to impose on him for years. It was quiet, it was clever, it was perfect. My dad never asked for her reaction. He didn't need to. The satisfaction was in the act itself. He had reclaimed his dignity in a way that words could never have captured, in a way that confrontation could never have achieved. He had delivered justice subtly, cleanly, and irreversibly. Over time, the story became one of those things we all remembered and laughed about every Christmas. It wasn't just the gift itself or the absurdity of the dogs. It was the way my dad had handled it. Calm, deliberate, and unflinchingly clever. The moment she received the dogs, no one else needed to see her reaction to know that it was everything we had imagined it would be. That quiet triumph became part of our family lore. We retold it every year, embellishing small details for comic effect, but never altering the core truth. My dad, the man who had been dismissed and belittled, had orchestrated a moment of perfect, poetic revenge. And I realized something important that day. Wealth and status can buy comfort. They can buy fancy gifts, luxurious holidays, and endless admiration. But they cannot buy class. They cannot buy ingenuity. They cannot buy the quiet, confident humor that comes from knowing yourself, knowing your worth, and acting on it with precision. Every Christmas since, whenever the topic of gifts comes up, or when someone mentions family tension, we all share a small, knowing smile. We remember those dancing dogs, we remember the note, and we laugh. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't loud. It doesn't come with shouting or drama. It doesn't need confrontation or vindictiveness. Sometimes the best revenge comes wrapped in a luxury box. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, clever smile of a man who knows he has the last laugh. And sometimes the act is so perfect that it becomes timeless. That Christmas taught me something I will never forget. Justice doesn't always need to be brutal. It doesn't need to be spectacular. It doesn't even need to be public. The most satisfying victories are often subtle, creative, and entirely deserved. And the best part? Every December, when the world seems to spin faster with holiday stress, we think of those dogs. We think of my dad's quiet revenge, and we laugh again. Because in the end, laughter, cleverness, and a little bit of patience will always outshine wealth, entitlement, and arrogance.